Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Matchbook Flashback. I'm your host, Alec Ogg, and I've got this big collection of old matchbooks here I bought at an estate sale recently. They're here in this glass jar, and there's hundreds of matchbooks. They're all different colors and designs from all different times and places. But the thing is, when I strike each match, the flame begins to swirl hypnotically. And if you look into the flame, you can see a story unfolding in there, trapped like a memory in the matchbook. Let me grab one here out of the jar. Okay. See a blue one down here I'm trying to get to. There we go. Okay, yeah, like I said, this is a blue matchbook. It's this beautiful blue color, and it appears to be from the late 80s. I'd guess 88, 89. Some kind of tourist matchbook for the state of Massachusetts. On the front says Massachusetts in white script, and on the back is a little cartoon map showing some hiking areas in western Massachusetts. Got some little lake icons here. They're labeled the Cobble Mountain Reservoir, the Granville Reservoir, and some trails like Uncommits Path, and a mountain called Drake Mountain. These are outside Springfield, Massachusetts, just north of the Connecticut border. But let's strike one of these Massachusetts matchbooks. It's a tongue twister. Massachusetts matchbooks. And see if there's a story inside. So when I strike this match, I need you to look deeply into the flame. That's where the story is. Look deeply into the flame.
Yeah, there's not too much to know about me. I'm a butcher. I'm former military. I was heavy into martial arts. I used to train bouncers, and I did a lot of hunting and fishing. A lot. If it wasn't with my brother, then it was solo, completely by myself. And the area you're going to hear about is one of the areas I would go in by myself. This happened back in the late 80s, back in the state of Massachusetts. I was in the Cobble Mountain region. In that part of the Cobble Mountain region of Massachusetts, it's a reservoir, a huge reservoir. There's a Drake Mountain there. That's the mountain that I chose to hunt on that morning. It's surrounded by other mountains, Sodom Mountain, Bad Luck Mountain, Mount Greylock, a few other ones. And it was the first week of deer season for shotgun in Massachusetts. The morning that I was hunting, I back in, I'll say, the olden days, we didn't have these GPS things and all of that. We had compasses and topographical maps, and you would go down to your local bookstore and you would say, hey, I need a topographical map of quadrant whatever up in the Granville Reservoir area for Drake Mountain, and that's what you would get, and that's what I would take in, and I would scout that area for weeks. Once, twice a week, I would go up there and I would mark off on a topographical map where the deer trails were, or deer runs were, where the water sources were, where the different types of feed sources are. Because that's where you want to be. That's where they're going to be. That's where you're going to pick up tracks. They're coming and going from their beds, in the morning till at night and going back to their beds. So that's what I had done, is I had taken a topographical map and scouted the area. And that morning, I deemed that the wind was blowing in the direction so that I wanted to be actually coming up from the Granville Reservoir, which is right across from the Cobble Mountain Reservoir, to go up Drake Mountain. I had to walk in. So because the wind was blowing towards me and it was crispy out that morning, I knew that if there was anything up there, it wouldn't smell me. That was my plan, and I knew there was an apple orchard, a couple apple orchards surrounding that mountain also. But that's what I had done is I had started my hike in along like a fire access road along the Granville Reservoir section, and then I hooked up to the side of the mountain, and it was an old trail, fire road, maybe logging road, and the farmers used it at one time. I do know now that it's actually part of what they call Unkemit's Path, and that's named after an Indian that he would bring the tax collectors from the colonial village in Connecticut all the way up through the mountains, all the way up to Pittsfield and places like that. Quite a distance. So obviously he must have come across a few of these things also. And there's a lot of legend and history in that area too. But I always passed it off. I said, whatever will keep normal people out of the area, the better for me, because I don't want to be hunting in areas where there's other people. In Massachusetts, a lot of people use buckshot. You don't want to get shot by accident. Okay. But I had proceeded to go up the side of that mountain, and the trail actually hooked to the left. And I knew, oh, three-quarters of the way up, there was these three boulders that reminded me of like American Stonehenge. They're huge boulders. One side, just beyond that, was called Lookout Rock, and it's a 40-foot tall boulder on basically on top of Drake Mountain. And so you can imagine the size of these boulders, but they're close together, and I figured that the deer were going to be in that right in there. It was a big enough area you could easily camp out in it. But indeed they were. As I got closer to them, you had to step on the ground was a little crispy, a little leaves were there was no snow on the ground, and it was you could see your breath out there a little bit, so it had to be in the 30s, like I'd say like maybe 33 or somewhere around there, because that's just about when you can see your breath. And there's a lot of flat rocks that you can walk on. You just have to be careful you don't slide on them or anything. So I was doing what you call a two-step, trying to sound like a four-legged animal rather than a two-legged, like a bipedal. And I had indeed did jump some deer that were in that area in those boulders, and they proceeded to go straight up to the top of the mountain to parallel that ridge line going away from me. And the fire road, we'll call it, that I was on, or Unkemit's Path that I was on, actually hooked and then came back and ran parallel to where they were going. So my objective was to get out in front of them. It was a chance, but that's what I needed to do. I wanted to take a harvest. So I had actually gotten out in front of them, and I was waiting for them. The path that I was on actually dog-legged back. Part of it actually dog-legged back down around the other side of that mountain. And there was a brook there called Drake Brook that comes out right there. And there was a stone wall that ran from the path that I was on to the dogleg section straight across. And I was right at the turn right there. And that stone wall on the side that the deer were coming on had a lot of saplings on it, a lot of beech nuts. There's little acorns in there. And then on my side of the stone wall, there was a couple of old pine trees, big pine trees, not a lot of them. So I knew that when they came across, and they were coming, I could hear them coming. When they got across that stone wall, I'd be able to take a shot and harvest my deer.
The rock wall or the stone wall you were describing, was that a natural stone wall or was that a man-made stone wall?
All stone walls are man-made.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you were describing some kind of
Yeah.
natural rock
That's okay. I
formation.
got you. There's a lot of them in the New England area, that when farmers I mean, we used to call it, the rocks were growing. We say the rocks were growing in the springtime from the frost, from the wintertime. The frost would be so deep, the frost could be 4 or 5 feet deep. And as it thawed out, it would push rocks up. So every year you'd have rocks in your gardens and everything. So they would pick them up and they would stack them. And also during the Civil War, they would also find rocks and try to stack them up. So you had a little bit of something to hide behind, but they're boundary markers.
Okay.
But as I approached that corner, I took a look to, because it was sort of in the open. I took a look to make sure nothing was there because I didn't want to scare anything. Because if there was a squirrel there or a grouse or a pheasant or a rabbit and I scared it, the deer would alert to that and they would take off away from me. I didn't see a darn thing. There was nothing there. So I took a position of half crouch and almost kneeling, facing that stone wall, and I could hear the deer coming, waiting for the deer to come over. I had my 12 gauge shotgun up, uh, pointed at it, semi-auto, loaded with slugs, and I noticed movement off peripheral, off to my 9 o'clock. So I cocked my head a little bit over there. You don't want to fully take a look at it, until you identify it, because I wanted to make sure that if any deer came over the stone wall, I would still be able to take a shot. But the movement at first appeared to be it was laying down, obviously near this tree, and I thought maybe it was another deer, a buck, because they don't normally travel with a bunch of the females and stuff, particularly that time of the year. But it had its head around the other side of the tree, and I really couldn't make it out, so I drew up on it, figuring that it was indeed that's what it was. Well, it started getting up closer to the tree, and it was bulkier than a deer, and it appeared to be, because of its bulkness, a bear. I figured it's a bear. I don't got a bear permit. I don't need this thing bum rushing me. It was 35 yards. I guess made it 35 yards from my position, and it started getting closer to the tree and getting up a little bit more. And at that point, I knew it wasn't a bear. My thought was that this is a guy. There is another guy in here. He must have been sleeping on the ground. I don't know how I missed him, but he must be hearing these deer that are getting ready to come through. And he started getting up a little bit, but he's hugging that tree, his head around the opposite side of the tree that I'm standing on at 35 yards away. And my concern at that time was that he doesn't know I'm there. And if these deer come over that stone wall and they run between us, I'm going to get shot. So I have to change my position. Now, remember, I'm trying to keep cognizant of that stone wall also. I don't want to miss an opportunity there. So I figured I would move up past his 3 o'clock. I would have been on his 3 o'clock. I wanted to move up past his 3 o'clock to quite possibly into his 2 o'clock so he could get a peripheral on me if need be. And I did that. And it was right at that moment that I noticed this guy was getting up even more. This guy was hugging the tree. He had his right arm around the tree, head still on the opposite side of the tree. This guy was huge. I mean, huge. And I was just taken aback by the fact that I couldn't believe your brain is trying to put it into a hole for you. Take that peg and put it into a hole. And that's when I realized that this was way bigger than any man that I've ever seen, and he's not wearing any color or anything like orange that you should be, or anything. Not that I ever really did, because I'd be going in so darn far anyways. That's when I decided that I need to probably try to find something on the tree, but all heck broke loose on the other side of that stone wall. It was a knockdown drag out. I didn't just hear branches snap, and it would sound like some really thick branches snap, and I heard boulders crashing, bouncing into each other. There was a knockdown drag out on the other side of that stone wall. And I glanced back over at this. I'm gonna I'm gonna call it a guy at this point, a very, very large man. And I found a piece of moss on that tree that I could measure him off. I could see the back of his head. And my plan was that if everything went well, I was going to go over and check that out on the tree. And I mean, the sound on the other side of the stone wall was just unbelievable. That's when he decided he was going to step away from that tree and come around or put his head around my side of the tree. And that's exactly what he did. Still holding on to that tree with his right hand. He's come around and he stuck his head around the right hand side of that tree. And he was looking, he was intent on looking over that stone wall, and that's when he spotted me in his peripheral. Had he been a hunter, it would have worked out perfect. He spotted me in his peripheral. He looked over at me. He looked back over the stone wall. Then he did a double take on me. He was completely taken aback that I was standing. I was now standing there with my 12 gauge pointed right at him. And he fully swung his right leg around that tree to take a stance. So he was going to face me. That's what he was going to do. And this little fight on the other side of the stone wall was still going on, if you can imagine that. And but my focus is kind of like on him, and I'm also focused on there's obviously more than one of them. This thing must be set on a pinch point ambush. He stepped around that tree, swung his right leg around, and completely broadsided me, faced me. And is this being man-like thing made it a hand gesture to me. And this thing put both hands facing me, palms facing me, fingers up, fingers closed, elbows into to its waistline, and pumped them twice at me. Now that's you're telling me that you know to whoa, wait a minute. That's what I took it to mean. Whoa, wait a minute. It pumped its hands. I took that as a meaning of sign language to hold on 2 times, and it started walking towards me. And as it walked towards me, it took its right hand, fist closed, pointer finger out, pointed directly to my chest, middle of my chest, and then pointed towards its own chest. Again, that means something. Okay, that's a form of communication. It means something. It means you pointed to me first with one finger. That means I'm not greater than you. You're not using 2 fingers. You're using one finger. And then he pointed to his own chest, one finger. That means we're equal, not greater than. I'm not greater than you. You're not greater than me. He was actually telling me, whoa, whoa, we're equal. We're brothers. So now I'm lowering my shotgun. I'm at half ready on my shotgun. I don't know what the hell is going on here, but I checked my breath. I breathed out to try to remain cognizant of what was going on and not panic. That fight or flight could kick in and upset your whole train of thought. And I looked at my wristwatch. I checked my breath, like I said, and I remember a plane going overhead, headed towards Bradley International Airport. So I knew I even smelled the gun oil on my gun. So I knew I wasn't dreaming. I felt like maybe this is maybe some kind of a freaking dream or something. I'm here. I'm seeing all of this, and it continued to walk towards me. This originally started off at 35 yards, and it continued to walk towards me. And after it did the pointer finger towards my chest and its own chest, it put its hands out, elbows half cocked, elbows in, so its arms were bent at the elbows, palms down. And then it took its palms and turned its palms over. And I took that to mean that it didn't have any food, that it wanted food. And anybody can say whatever they want to say. They can say it was asking me for the gun. It wasn't going to get it. That's preposterous. That's not what happened. This thing was actually, that's what it appeared to be. And that's what they were doing. They were hunting. And that's why you hunt. You hunt for food. So obviously it had no food and it wanted food. It was looking for food and it was trying to convey that to me. And it continued to walk towards me. And as it got a little bit closer, when it did this, took again its pointer finger and basically pointed to the left, pointed to the right, over my shoulders. And it did another hand gesture too. At this point, it was extremely close, and I'll leave it up to your audience maybe to try to figure this one out and how close it really was. It showed me its palm, and I looked down at its palm. I didn't look up. I didn't look forward. I looked down. It put its palm directly below my eyesight, straight between the two of us. And it tapped its own palm. And at that time, I was I mean, I was watching the shoulders. I was a fighter. I was watching shoulders. I was watching the head. I know what was going to happen. This thing was 7 foot 8 inches tall, and I'll tell you how I know that in a minute. And it was every ounce north of 500 pounds. It was 500 plus pounds, 7 foot 8 inches tall. But I was dropping my right hand towards my sidearm, and I just got my palm on my grip on my sidearm, and it tapped its palm, like tapped it. It wanted me to definitely look at its palm, so I did. And its palm looked just like my palm, except it didn't have a lifeline. So I figured this is probably my opportunity that I'm going to need to parlay some of these hand signals back to this guy, you know. So I proceeded to parlay some of the hand signals back to this being, this guy. I did the chest thing with the finger, his chest, my chest. I did the palms down, not the palms up. I wasn't asking him for food. I had no food. That's what I was telling him. So I assumed that meant. And I did the um, gesture over his left shoulder, his right shoulder. And that's when it looked at me and it nodded its head and it turned quarter turned. I was below his shoulder. That's how close I was. I can tell you this thing wasn't stinky. It wasn't dirty. Its hands weren't dirty. His fingernails weren't dirty. Its hair was 5 to 6 inches long, and the color of his hair was dark brown. A lot of people might mistake somebody for having black hair. Not true. They have dark brown hair.
What color was the skin on the face?
Oh, the skin on the face is um it was a dark, almost like the because the sun was peeking through. It would give it a little bit of a different tint. Like you're going to go from a deep, dark brown, like almost black, like Jamaican. You know how you're not black, you're brown, dark. You know, and then if you got a little bit of reflection, it would look like maybe almost ashy color at a time. But I think that was just because maybe it was oily or something. You know.
Yeah. What did its eyes look like?
Uh, yeah, yeah. I forget. Sometimes I leave that out of there. It had blue eyes. It had blue eyes.
Did they look like human blue eyes?
Absolutely. Beyond a shadow of any doubt. Absolutely. Yep.
What kind of blue would you say?
Yeah. Um, I'm trying to think to what to compare it to because
Like I guess I mean on a
well,
scale of
real
like
pretty.
steely gray to dark
No, no,
blue.
real pretty blue. Like um, not a dark blue, not a navy blue, not an ocean blue. Like a really nice, pretty bright blue. That's the best way I can explain that. It's a pretty blue,
Yeah.
right?
Did you look into its eyes?
Yeah, yeah. We made eye contact. Yeah, hmm absolutely. He was checking me out. I was checking him out. Well, people ask me if it was a male or a female, and am I sure? Well, I can tell you didn't have breasts, and I'm not checking anything else on him. I didn't want him to get the wrong impression, you know.
Yeah. Were you able to see any of the skin below the fur on the chest?
Yeah, the hair on
The
the
hair.
chest, just like me. Got the hair in the same spot, and where you don't have hair, there's no hair, and you can see the skin, same thing, same color. Even on the forearms, okay, you can see skin on the forearms. You don't have a lot of hair on your forearms. They don't either. They like I say, well, it's like 5 to 6 inches long anyway. So, God only knows what their metabolism is like to stay warm and everything, and their skin tone probably helps them out a little bit. But yeah, exactly where you have hair, they have hair.
Okay. What did the hair on the top of its head look like?
Almost like it was groomed. I'd say it might have been a little bit longer than than the 5 or 6 inches. Not much longer, but it was like layered. Um, Came down to its shoulders, like it probably grew all the way down its neck and just came out like that. It wasn't all fluffy. It wasn't parted in the middle or anything like that. It was just I don't want to say a beautiful animal. It is not. I don't deem it as being an animal unless you want to consider humans as being an animal. But clean. How about that? It was clean, like it had been like it had taken a bath or something. And that's not the only time I've ever heard that. I've heard this from other reports, accounts that I've taken. Exactly that they said the same thing as me. Is it was clean. Now, unless they're marching around a swamp or something, and yeah, I think they do that deliberately to keep bugs off them in certain areas of the country. But this was clean.
What did the nose look like?
African American,
Yeah, what did the lips look like?
just like yours, just
Okay.
like yours and mine. They weren't out of proportion at all. They weren't. You couldn't label them as being any type of another human. Just as normal as normal can be. Everything about it was body proportionate. Also, it didn't have arms hanging down to its ankles. Are they longer than ours? Well, heck yeah. I mean, I'm only 6'2", six, maybe a little bit over 6'2", so my arms are not going to be as long as a man's arms at 7'8". He's going to beat me in a game of basketball.
Yeah. What were you feeling when you were right there with it?
Well, what I was feeling and what I was trained to control was fight or flight. So I would have to say that, yeah, I was trying to maintain that fight or flight feeling because it'll fool you. You'll probably hear your own voice telling you run, 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 Forrest.
Yeah.
But uh, no, no, I was trying to remain cognizant of every sound that was going on around me. I didn't want to be flanked by any more. I didn't know what the real true intentions were of this being. Okay, I knew there was more than one, even though I didn't see them at first.
Yeah. I'll let you get back to your story. You were talking about how you started repeating the signs back to it.
Um, I did that gesture I figured it was where did you come from over his shoulders like that, and he nodded at me and he looked over that stone wall a quarter turn away from me, and he held both hands up like a megaphone to his mouth and he whooped. Up until that time, even to this date, nobody's ever seen them whoop. So you can all assume that they whoop, but you have never seen them whoop. You don't know if it's maybe a raven or something like that or whatever. You don't know, but I seen him whoop. And he whooped 3 times, a second and a half in between each one. Looked back at me, looked back over the stone wall, and then he whistled. And he made an arm gesture for whatever it was on the other side of that stone wall and pointed where he wanted it to go to. And that was basically back in the direction he came from. Now, again, I'm going to tell you that that whistle sounds just like a human being whistling, sounds just like people in my hunting party, sounded like my brother whistling. It was a come on whistle. It was like, shh, come on. So he looked back at me and he again nodded at me and he took off in that direction. He didn't run, he didn't lumber, he didn't speed walk. He I want to say casually, but the gait that he had was very fluent, very smooth. If you watch somebody who's a really good parkour runner, they're very smooth in what they do. Until they're ready to make their move, their jump or whatever. This is very smooth, no bobbing around or anything like that, effortlessly. And he went back out to about a 55-yard mark, back in the direction he had first came from, but beyond that. And he had got there and he turned and he faced towards me. And at that point right there, I heard um, a ruckus, like a freaking moose coming through the freaking woods where them saplings were, where that knockdown drag out happened with those deer. and I knew what it was. I knew exactly what it was. My spidey senses told me that there was more than one, and there indeed there was, and he was communicating. He communicated with them. If they really indeed do mind speak, he didn't need to make all those hand signals for my uh, pleasure to witness, but he did. So I'm not going to rule it out. It's quite possible that they can, some do, okay? But this thing was smaller, this thing was cinnamon colored, and it was running right towards him, and it went right over Drake Brook, about 100 yard sprint. It was literally heels and elbows. Um, and fast. I've shot deer on the run. If this thing wanted to catch a deer, it could catch a deer easily. If you are like a toddler trying to run away from Usain Bolt, okay, compared. And when people say, "Well, I outran it back to my car," you didn't outrun anything back to your car. It let you get away because it doesn't want you in the area for some reason. But it met up with the other one, and they were kind of almost quarter turned towards me, but still facing each other. And they had a little chit chat. And I had never heard it before. Uh, Up until then, it was probably, well, I'll say maybe a year later or so, I heard the Ron Moore had the Sierra Sound tapes, and I knew instantly. I knew instantly that what Ron Moorhead and them gentlemen had up from the Sierra Sounds was them. I've never heard them. We know Ron. Um, I'd love to speak to him personally. I will get that chance. And ask him if he ever actually seen them doing that, because up until then, this is 36 plus years ago, nobody ever seen him do any of this stuff. Even to this day, you don't. I've taken a lot of reports, and that was the Sierra Sounds. They were standing right in front of me, and they were doing this little chit chat thing going on. And then the big one, the other one was only a little bit over his shoulder. I figured he was like 6 foot, or she, whatever, was probably 6'4", 6'5", somewhere around there, maybe 6'6", I will say, but over the shoulder. I was below, it was over. And the big one, the dark colored one, pointed a finger right at me, ratted me out. And the littler one had to bend down a little bit to look underneath this sapling. It had a branch that came out there that, you really, it couldn't make me out, I don't believe, because it had to bend down just a little bit. And it looked over and it did a double take on me. It looked at the big one and looked back at me, and I'm like, these things can't believe that I'm standing here. That big one didn't was checking me out when it first came over to me. It didn't know that I was real, I think. Like maybe I had stepped through the veil. Well, after it pointed me out, it pointed to the other one, and it wanted the other one to make, because it would be basically on my right hand side, to make a right hand circle around me. It actually pointed to it to tell it to go up and around, like towards me. And it pointed to its own chest and did the same hand signal back to the left, like around me, like they were going to flank me. For whatever reason, I think that probably because they got a deer that and I never went over to check that. That's not my deer. That's not the way I was brought up. That was their deer, and I'm not about to try to take the buffet table away from a bunch of starving convicts. It might not be fruitful for me. Okay.
So then did they just walk away?
No, they performed what I like to call a flanking maneuver. One went out and around my right, okay, like a semicircle, okay, and the other one went out and around my left. The big one went out and around my left, like in a semicircle, like they were both going to try to flank me or keep an eye on me. So there was no way. I actually wanted to track them, up until that point. I wanted to know more about them because I figured it was a pretty friendly encounter. I want to know where they go, where do they sleep? Do they get in the trees? Obviously, they do get in the trees because that's what it sounded like to me, anyways. But what do you do? You got a boulder hiding your dugout like a woodchuck, or But they didn't want me to be following them around. They flanked me,
Yeah.
or were trying to.
So then what did you do next after they left?
So my main objective at that point was to suck it up and go over to the tree and measure up on that tree. And I found that piece of moss on the tree. And that was, I stood next to it and put my hand on top of my head. And then from there, I measured up to that piece of moss and I come up with 7 foot 8 inches tall. Maybe I'm off by an inch, maybe higher or lower, but whatever, 7 foot 8 inches tall. And then I could see where it ran through its pathway because there was a little knoll there. And I think what it did was it had crawled up that knoll to get to that tree. It was setting up the ambush point. And there was a little knoll there, and I could see where it was like an old perennial pool, and it had mashed down some ferns in there. No footprints in dirt or anything, but it mashed down some ferns. So I figured I would try to match up the stride with the height. And I tried to make a big long stride and get into its stride, and wasn't going to happen. It didn't happen. So I decided to make an effort to jump a little bit, and didn't happen. It didn't match it up. And then I tried to take a little bit of a run to start, and I still fell short. So I definitely knew this thing was well, huge. It had to be 7 foot 8, 7 foot 8 inches tall. I really can't ever change my mind on it because that was my measurement anyways, and its stride matched up with that. Um, they are very human-like looking, and they are very intelligent, and no ape or monkey or anything else without some kind of formal training like Coco is ever going to be able to do that. But that's pretty much it in I'd like to say a nutshell, but you can imagine from the start to the end, I was able to take in a lot of information.
So, what was the rest of your day like that day? What was going through your brain, and what were you thinking?
What brain? What brain? You don't have one. At that point, you don't have one out. Everything you ever knew. And this, for anybody listening to this right now, you better sit down and you better rethink everything that you ever knew. Because the biggest thing that hit me well, it's not even if this was real. This was real. And because this was real, what else have I been lied to about? Absolutely. What else? There's an awful lot out there. Okay. I can't ever say that this isn't true or that isn't true when somebody tells me something. Well, who am I to tell them that?
Are you comfortable sharing what role you were in the military?
Let's say a security specialist, combat specialist. You could
Okay.
say that. Hmm. That was my job. I was granted high level clearance. Okay. I could be dealing with sensitive information at the time.
So, did that military training affect how you reacted to this situation?
In my military training, I was trained to take in information, to look for information, take in information, retain the information. And that's exactly what I did. And I did it because I knew that someday I will be on a show or something 36 plus years ago, and I'll be able to recount this if I live through it. Who knows? I didn't know if I would or not. That was going through my head, so
Why didn't you shoot it when you first saw it coming towards you?
looked too human and it acted too human. It looked too human, even by its size, and it acted too human, and it knew how to approach me. And that's what I mean by acting human. It knew how to approach me. It knew how to get me to um, simmer down, or it's okay, we're cool, you know. That's why. And why would you ever want to shoot another human? Just because they look funny?
When the thing whooped in front of you, are there
Yep.
any recordings or impressions that you could point to that um
There's a lot of them out there, but not off the top of my head. Nothing written down. Because you got to remember, I know that I know that's them when I hear them. I definitely know that that's them when I hear it. It's a definite. You have to imagine, go record one of your buddies that has a deep voice and holds his hand up like a megaphone and just goes whoop, whoop, like that. And that sounds human. Okay. Now, if it doesn't sound real human and really loud, like it'll reverberate in you. It sounds like you went to, if you go to a zoo and you hear a lion kind of roar, and when it first starts out, it's "Rrr," like that, you can actually feel it in your being. That's them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you feel it when it whooped right in front of you?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Incredible. Yeah. Absolutely incredible. I couldn't, it was just unfathomable in a way. You could actually feel it doing it. And loud too.
Did you get a look at the eyes of the second one?
Oh, heck no, no. It was 55 yards away. At
Okay.
55 yards or so away from you, you're going to think that they are all hairy because their hair, like the one that was closest to me, his hair would blend completely perfectly in with its skin tone. So at that distance, you wouldn't know where the hair stopped and started. You wouldn't know how thick it was or how much there actually was, So same thing.
So you weren't ever scared or having fear after this?
During the encounter at a couple of points, I was deeply concerned. After this encounter, yes, it bothered me because who do you talk about? Who do you tell? The people that you think you're going to tell are not the people you should be telling. Even if they're family, even if it's your mother or your father, they're gonna probably look at you like you're completely crazy. This is probably one that you will never hear again from anybody. It's been this long and nobody's ever come forward. And maybe they haven't come forward because of fear, and that's why I stood up. If I stand up, then other people will stand up too. Because I was one of those that didn't want to stand up. I was terrified of people making fun of it. And some people have who are big in the field at the time that this happened. So I kept it inside. I said, man, if you're going to make fun of me, then everybody's going to make fun of me. So now I'm here and standing up for the little guys. And it's like, I don't care how small an encounter. I don't care if it was a 2-second encounter. I want to hear about it because to get it off your chest, it really breaks it up for you. You get over because it is terrifying. It can be very, very terrifying for some people. Me, I just pretty much towards the middle of it, I started thinking to myself, this is really cool in a way,
Yeah.
in a way, like, heck, I don't know. Are we going to go smoke some fish or what's going on?
You were ready to join them.
I was,
Yeah.
but until they decided to split up like that, then I said, man, that's not cool. I never went over and checked those to see the deer. I didn't need to. I know that they got a deer, at least one deer over there, and there had to have been way more than one uh, of those individuals over there. I can't imagine all that noise was made by one other one besides the one that was near me.
Yeah.
But again, usually you'll hear close encounters. They're like, you know, they consider to be 50 yards or whatever, and once in a while you hear like 20 yards. This was like 5 feet.
As you can see, the match has gone out, and as the smoke clears, I can still smell some of that fresh western Massachusetts air coming off the Granville Reservoir up into the Drake Mountain there. I hope you enjoyed that Bigfoot encounter as much as I did. And if you did, you should share the love. A great way to support this budding new show is to send a link of this episode to someone who you think might enjoy it too. Do you know someone with blue eyes? Maybe you could send them this and say, hey, this reminded me of you. They'll be very touched. Another way to support Matchbook Flashback is to give the show a 5-star rating on whatever platform you listen to. And hey, if you're on YouTube, subscribe. By the way, if you or someone you know has an unusual story, send it my way. My email is alec@parasaur.co. It's spelled out in the show notes. But that's it from me. I really appreciate you stopping by, and I hope you come back next week, because I have another match to light.